guns, I like the way they look. I like the shiny steel and the polished wood. I don't care if they're big or small, if they're for sale, hell, I want them all. I like guns, I like guns, I like guns.
We might have problems with the rain, but we won't worry about that. Now, let's start off. This is Curle. He's a well-known wildfowler, and Wit, he'll be looking after you today in the ring. I'm Summerell, and I'm a gunsmith. I've been one for 45 years. Started off in Crudgington's in Bath, then moved to Cirencester, and now I work in my own workshop in North Somerset. This talk on the history of the sporting gun I first gave back 20 years ago, and it lasts 2 hours. Don't worry, you haven't got the 2-hour version. I've cut it down to about half an hour. Den's going to tell me when I've got to stop. Firearms are so interesting. It's so involved. Over the years, people have developed firearms and they've got better and better at it. Today, people go out and they use over and unders. And they just put a cartridge in. The black powder I'm using, and for wads I'm using toilet paper. Recycled, colour optional. Now, of course it's an ejector, so you've got to pick up your empties. And it's easy. Factory made ammo, no problem at all. Now comes the problem. Let's go back 400 years. Now 400 years ago, they developed the matchlock. Now the matchlock was used during the English Civil War, which was 1640, but it had been developed before then in the 1400s. But in this weather, we just hope that it worked. Den, can you hold that a second? What we've got is we've got a match. And this match has to be a light. So let's get it out of the wind so we can light it. Suffering from wind, you see. So just imagine doing this if you're in a battle. Got to be horrendous, but they used to have irons and all sorts to help them out. So what you've got now is a match. You keep your match down, keep your match out, and then you've got to load your weapon. What we're using is black powder developed by the Chinese 2,000 years ago. They mainly used it for fireworks, but they did start shooting arrows with it. But the problem was that the emperor at the time didn't like it and banned it. They also, the Chinese, banned the use of knives because they were worried about the emperor being killed, and that's why the Chinese used chopsticks. Now the next thing we've got to do is prime it. We use slightly finer powder for priming powder, and this goes in the pan. You put the cover across, then you want your match. Okay, what you've got to do is make sure the match lines up with the hole, with the powder. Now the wind is helping the match at the moment because it's burning better. You lift it off. and then you've got to do it again. But the problem is with this is that it takes so much time, and in this wet weather, once it all gets damp, the match goes out, the powder gets damp, and you know what they say, you've got to keep your powder dry. You'll find that when you're giving a talk, I say things, and they're sayings that we use every day, and they're all from using firearms. And what I'm trying to do now is put my match out. That's done. So, with the problems with the damp and the wet and the time it takes to fire a matchlock, they can come up with the idea of using a flint. They were using flints to start fires. So somebody said, well, why don't we put it onto a lock? And they made a lock up with a frizzen and a flint. And what they do, the same thing again. Is your powder goes in first.
Just to interrupt you in a minute there. I don't know if you realise, we called our first guns, we called them muskets. It's a strange word, a musket. Do you know where it came from? Well, until we had these fire sticks, we used to hunt with a falconer. The old falconer. And he used to have on his fist a musket, a male sparrow hawk. So when this gun killed a bird, somebody said that's as fast as a musket. So we called our guns muskets after the thing that it replaced. The male sparrow hawk, the musket. Bit of useless information, but nevertheless.
And they say that they didn't use matchlocks for shooting flying game. But there was a report in 1454 in southern Spain where they used to use falcons and spaniels to hunt partridge, that they used a matchlock. So matchlocks have been used for game, but it would have been a straightaway flying bird, so it wouldn't have been cross. This is on half cock, and you've heard going off half cock. If it was to fire now, it would be unsafe, and you put it back onto full cock. The pan has fine powder in it, and the musket was normally coarser powder. Oh, it worked. Thank God for that. The powder is getting damp, and it's beginning to stick to my fingers. So in time, it's going to go. Now, there was, in 1851, they developed something called the pinfire. Unfortunately, my friend who used to do this with me had wildfowling flintlocks and pinfires that we used to use. Unfortunately, Gerald passed away a couple of weeks ago, and his funeral is tomorrow. So today's talk is dedicated to Gerald and all the old wildfowlers. They kept wildfowling going over the years. Like that. Yeah.
It is fair to say though, mine Ian's going to talk about, we moved from the flintlock to something called the percussion. And that was a Scottish vicar by the name of Alexander Forsyth. The Scots are very tight. I mean, when they buy new shoes, they take bigger steps. And he used to detest wasting his shot and powder. And he would go out on his leg with his right, and his flintlock used to go bang, and the ducks would duck on the and the shot would go over the top and they'd bob up again. He didn't kill any. So he developed something called, or he found something called formulates of mercury. Formulates of mercury goes bang when you hit it. And this is where we are now. This is called the percussion system, which followed the flintlock system. He patented that in 1807. And as Ian said, in 1851, we had something called the Great Exhibition. And Ian will tell you all about that in just a minute.
Yeah, after the pin fire, they then had problems with it because the pins would stick, the cartridges would stick in the gun. And what they developed was the percussion system before, and this was a copper cap. and the copper cap goes over a nipple. Now this was a godsend over the flintlock, because all you had is a little cap, and they come with a little dispenser. Just pop it on the nipple. Now, 2 barrels put together. Joseph Manton was a gunmaker in London. He was the first man to put 2 barrels together and solder or tin the barrels together with a rib. Now, Manton came up with something called the tube lock. There wasn't very many guns made, but that was his development of the percussion system. Alexander Forsyth took him to court for breach of patent, because he was using the percussion system in his scent bottle. Unfortunately, the scent bottle in time, because it spun on a mandrel, would wear out and became dangerous. But he developed it, which allowed the rest of the gun trade to then make new developments. The percussion cap was developed by an artist called Joshua Shaw, who was British and had moved to America. And he moved to Philadelphia, and he designed the copper cap. And that was, we think it was around 1817. But he didn't get the patent to 1837 because of court cases, because a number of people had developed it at the same time. And the judge found that Joshua Shaw had done it first. And he was an artist, and if you go online, there's a couple of museums that have got great, brilliant landscapes of Joshua Shaw's. And he was an incredible fine artist. But he developed the percussion cap, which now gives us 2 barrels because of Manton and a faster shooting gun. Now we come on to shooting game. Now in 1700, James II came back from France, and in France they had gamekeepers and pheasants and partridge, mainly partridge at this stage. And when they came back, they developed the states, because we'd had the Glorious Revolution of 1888, and the states were divided up with the big landlords, and they developed the states. The estates had farmers, they were growing grain, and they also had keepers. And it wouldn't just be one keeper like you've got today on an estate, it would be a team of keepers. You'd have a head keeper, you'd have a beat keeper, and apprentices. And it was mainly partridges, and they were now shooting birds on the wing, and they were driving birds over guns. With the percussion system, that allowed you to do it. With flintlocks, it was mainly walked up. With percussion, that now allowed you to have a peg, have 2 guns, have a loader, and they would come over your head. And they would then started doing more pheasants as partridges became less, because more people were going into the towns, and the towns were growing up, and the population was growing. But there's a problem. You've still got to load the percussion system manually. So we've had the pinfire, and then in 1860 Dawes came up with the cartridge we use today, called the centerfire, used for rifles and for shotguns. Now this is a Gibbs hammer gun, centerfire. Originally it was a pinfire, and it's been converted. Cartridges are a bit stiff. And this is a pinfire action, but it's been converted for centerfire, and the strikers on it are actually banana shaped, because this is the way that they could see to get over the problem of the hammer coming down one way and hitting, and the striker hitting on the centre. Later on, they put a nipple on with a striker in, but the hammer would fall forward and you had to put the gun on half cock to open the gun. Now we have the modern gun. We got the cartridge. I'm not going to worry about the ejection of guns, because even in those days, in the early days of hammer guns, there were gun makers doing ejector hammer guns, so it wasn't anything new. What I want to concentrate on is how they develop things and the designing of things. The problem is, somebody would come up with an idea. Now, the hammer gun originally was an underlever, and that was designed by one gun maker. So at Gibbs's, to get over the patent because he couldn't use it, designed a side lever. Then somebody came up with the idea of putting the top lever on the top. It was easier to use. Just use it with your thumb. You didn't have to crank the bottom open. The gun was stronger. But all these developments happened over time, and a lot of them was to get over patents, and the other thing was to make it look like you were a better gun maker than your neighbour. For instance, Greeners put a third bite on a gun as a sales pitch, like putting go faster stripes on your go-kart, and that went across the top strap that came out. This is a doll's head to make it tight. But when you're gun making and fitting a gun, you will find that although you've got 3 bites, it'll only hold tight on one. However much you try and get it on everything, it always goes tight on one. And what you try and do is get it tight on the back one. You want it just touching the other 2, but tight on the back. Now the hammer guns are easy, and if I could give my apprentice a go, because he's been standing there ever so friendly. Two hammers on the side, pull them back, and what you've got is this is rebound locks. So when the hammer goes forward, it comes back, which releases the striker. But you've still got the hammers on the outside of the gun. What we need to do now to come up to the modern age is get the hammers on the inside of the gun. And there was mainly side locks to start with, and they were called hammerless guns. Some of them actually had the shape of the hammer on the outside and a tumbler on the inside that hit the striker. And then in Wesley Richards there was 2 guys in there called Anson and Dealey, and they designed something called the box lock. And this was a cheap, easy gun that could be made, manufactured, and used and bought cheaply. And this was for the masses. This is like your Ford Escort. And once again, it locked with the top lever that we saw on the hammer gun. This now, a lot of them became ejectors as well. So you had box lock ejectors, side lock ejectors. But this is my pigeon shooting gun, and in the hide I find I don't need an ejector. I don't want to throw cartridges into the hedge behind me. I want to pick all the mess up when I go. So although I can shoot this, I can just pick the cartridges out, and I keep a carrier bag opened up in the corner of the hide, and I just throw the empty cartridges in it when I'm going. Now as a loader, you can give the gun closed, and what you do if you're standing behind a gun on a peg,
You're gonna go.
you load the gun behind and you hand the gun so that way round, so he can pick it up with his left hand.
And when I fire it, they want my loader to unload it.
No, you don't open it up.
Well, I give it.
But some people do, but you give it to me that way. Yeah.
And we turn around like that, and run the other one back.
Yeah.
You can also have somebody called a stopper. A stopper is not a loader. As you break the gun, he stands there and he puts his 2 cartridges in. And he's a stopper. But a loader, it's a good job if you're a loader. You spend maybe 120 pounds a day on a good shoot to be a loader. It's a skill job, you could easily make a mistake. You don't want to shoot your boss.
With percussions, they even used to make 3 guns, so that your 2 loaders behind, one would pass the gun and take the gun, and the one behind would actually load the gun. And they would actually make percussion guns in 3s, which is quite a feat if you've got to make 3 guns and they've got to be exactly the same weight, exactly the same size, stock has got to be the same, so they handle exactly the same. How are we off for time?
We got about 7 minutes, 8 minutes.
8 minutes, right. As it's not raining, I'm going to let you fire there. Do you want to fire there?
I don't mind firing that in. Matter of interest, it's really the world record for the number of dead pheasants in the air to one man to one gun in a minute. Anybody like to have a guess as to what that might be? It's actually been done. It was done by Lord many years ago. The record is actually 27 birds in the air, dead at one time in a minute. Dead in a minute, 7 of those were dead in the air at the same time. And when you think that the world record for Percussion today is something around about, it's well over 1,000 to one gun in a day. I don't know how they can justify that. They did. The wonderful thing about guns is, of course, that guns are absolutely perfectly safe.
Right. Now, this was normally used by a musketeer. You've heard of the 3 musketeers. And when Henry VIII in 1730, 1740-ish had problems with developing guns, he, yeah, and we've got them like this as well, and he took the Huguenots over. Now we know the Huguenots were good at silk work, we know they were good at making cloth, but they also had the secrets of the arquebus. The arquebus was a forerunner of the matchlock. And Henry VIII took them over and put them in the Tower of London, not the Tower of London as prisoners, but Tower of London as an industrial unit. And they were making firearms for Henry VIII. And he gave a charter to a family to make firearms. See, now we've got problems with the wind now. But you see, they didn't have lighters back in those days. They would have had a fire going. And the problem is, people don't smoke these days, so it's difficult to... come on. It isn't going to happen, is it? Yeah, it is. Look at that. We're getting there, honest. Trust me. Don't worry, the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. They used to say, when I was an apprentice, 2 things happened. They would joke, the guys that would use flintlocks would say, what are you going to do when the Russians come? He said, I'll use something a bit more modern. We thought, he's talking about over and unders or side by sides. He said, I'll use a percussion. It's gone out. The wind actually put it out. When it gets going, the wind actually keeps it going. There's a story they tell in Bath about a battle up at by the racecourse up at Lansdowne during the English Civil War. The two forces, the Roundheads and the Royalists, were camped up by the racecourse at Lansdowne, and one of the forces didn't want to fight the next morning, so what they did is they got the match lit, and in the dark they could see all the matches along the edge of this wall, and it glowed, and they thought the army was still there, so they put all the matches in the wind, and the wind was allowing the match to keep going, and they all disappeared. Now I think I'm right in saying that it was the parliamentary forces that left the field because they weren't going to fight that day, and it was called the Battle of Lansdowne, and it was a very... Can you just hold on while I put the match in? And that was because of their matches, and they used the matches. Right, go on then, here you are, pull the cover back. Pull the cover back, point the barrel up in the air.
Mr. Ian Summerell, thank you very much. Good round of applause, like I say, the man's a history lesson. Thank you, Ian, for that.
That's all right.
I'll have your microphone when...
Thank you very much, Dan, for helping me out.